This time I'd like to ask Erica Pachuca, our office manager, to come to the podium and offer the invocation.
Good morning. Let's bow our heads. Father, as the events of the day continue to unfold, we seek your clarity, presence, and your peace. We know you are with us together here. Scripture reminds us that as we seek you, the more we will find you. Lead our surrender hearts to the path of your peace today. Come fully into our situation, both as a group and individually. We thank you for everyone gathered here now and watching virtually. Thank you that you know each of us by name. As we surrender ourselves in adoration, we ask that you would come with your Holy Spirit and inspire our hearts today. Come fill our lives with your love. Fill our conversations with your grace and truth. Fill this meeting with your presence. We ask this for your glory and praise. In your Son's precious name, amen.
Thank you, Erica. And believe me, I had to twist her arm a little bit to do this again today, but she did a fantastic job, so thanks. Can you please all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? You can stand if you'd like. Those of you online, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the country for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. So we've got quite a cast here today, but very pleased that we have a number of elected officials in the room with us today, but also joining us virtually. We also have a lot of chamber board members also in the room and joining us virtually. So thanks for all your support and interest in this really important topic. So we're going to build a little bit on last week's State of the County address with Judge Brannick. We're going to employ some more technology from last week, and we're really happy that we're able to do this for you. But we've got a number of sponsors that we have to recognize. Truly appreciate their support. As I said last week, we couldn't do this without them. So I'm going to start first with our series sponsors. These are the businesses that have sponsored all of our luncheons this year. I'm going to read them off to you in just a moment. American Air Systems, Baptist Hospital of Southeast Texas, CenterPoint Energy, G&G Enterprises Construction Corporation, Gulf Coast Materials, a CRH company, iHeartMedia, KFDM Fox 4, Lamar Institute of Technology, Lamar University, Mason Construction, Mobile Oil Credit Union, Optimus Steel, the Port of Beaumont, Regina Rogers, Restep Marketing, Spindletop Center, the Medical Center of Southeast Texas, and Total Petrochemicals and Refining USA. Thank you for all your support out there. Also, thanks to American Valve and Hydrant for your support today. Special thanks to two organizations. Number one, Bill Clark Pest Control. They are a photo booth sponsor that we really haven't had a chance to use much this year, but we're hoping the back half of this year we can get some great photos with their help in there. And last but not least, Lamar Institute of Technology for all their help and the video that they have let us use for these couple broadcasts. Great companies, great support, and thank you all. So now we're going to get going. Our title sponsor for this entire series, CHRISTUS Southeast Texas Health Systems. Please help me welcome Ms. Ivy Pate, Regional Vice President of CHRISTUS Southeast Texas Health Systems, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Well, it's an honor to introduce Mr. Glenn Hager. I had the privilege of working at the Texas Controller's Office once upon a time, so I know a little bit about it, and I'm very impressed with Mr. Hager. He's a sixth-generation Texan who grew up farming land that had been in his family for over 6 generations, and the family had owned this land since the mid-1800s. He's a 1993 graduate of Texas A&M University. From there, he went on to earn his JD from St. Mary's University and a Master's of Law degree from the University of Arkansas. Glenn has served in the Texas legislature where he worked on issues including public education, transportation, tax reform, government transparency, Second Amendment rights, water issues, and tort reform. And that seems like a lot to me to deal with. As controller, Glenn is chief financial officer for the world's 10th largest economy. And for those of you who think I mispronounced it, I was taught when I worked there that it's controller. First definition. So which ones you know I'm not messing up. He has emerged as a passionate advocate for conservative financial management and government transparency, who has focused on creating a more efficient and customer-oriented agency. He founded the state's Transparency Stars program, and he pushed for smarter ways of investing our rainy day fund to protect it for future generations. And he's guided the formation of the nation's first ever state-administered precious metals depository. His upbringing taught him the core values of hard work, honesty, and integrity, the same values that he and his wife Dora worked to instill in their 3 young children, Claire, Julia, and Jonah. He says that his most important title throughout his years of service is the one closest to home, that of Dad. And now we welcome Mr. Glenn Hager.
Thank you, Ivy. It's great to be with you today. Great to be with the Beaumont Chamber. First and foremost, I wish I was with you today. I know we all wish that we were in person, but so is unfortunately the days that we are with a global pandemic. First, I'll start off by giving a little bit of background on kind of where we see the state of the economy. And then I know we have some Q&A sessions with Bill later on. So thanks for inviting me today. It's great to be with you. Again, really wish I was in Beaumont, Texas, but so is the day that we're at. So if you go back just kind of real quick, kind of where was Texas prior to the month of March, and then obviously leading up to now in August. You go back to February of this year, which I don't know about you, but for me, that seemed like a really, really long time ago. The days and the weeks have been really long, a lot of different issues that we've had to deal with in the controller's office. For those of you that are not aware, in the controller's office, we have roughly 3,000 employees, 26 different divisions, have 3 main core constitutional responsibilities. One, running the state treasury, as you heard, so that roughly about $126 billion a year that goes through your state budget, whether a third of that is federal dollars or 2/3 of that is state dollars. And then of the state dollar portion, taxes are obviously the biggest piece of that. And so therefore, you'll hear me talk a little bit more about sales tax and some other state revenue streams, and that's because of the tax piece. Sales tax is roughly about 58% of all sales tax collections, and then automobile sales and rental taxes are about another 8%. So the point being, of all the different revenue streams in the state treasury, the sales tax piece is definitely the most important critical piece for the health of the state treasury. As I talk about taxes, that's also the second constitutional duty, is because I'm your tax collector. So I always worry a little bit when I mention that point to everybody, but being virtual, I don't have to worry about it as much. And then thirdly, monitoring the state economy, because the day before session, the second Monday in an odd given year. So in 2021, the day before session, constitutionally, I'm required to tell the legislature how much we estimate will come in the state treasury. And so we did a revision to our estimate here recently, because obviously we've had a downturn in the state economy, the national economy, and the global economy. But first, let me go back, as I was mentioned earlier, to the month of February. In the month of February, Texas as a state, all 254 counties, 12 economic regions, Texas as a state gained roughly 50,000 jobs in the month of February. In the prior 12 months, so the prior 11 months plus February, Texas had gained over 300,000 jobs. And to put that in perspective, roughly Texas was one of the largest, fastest growing economies in the nation. We have typically outpaced the national average for year after year as far as economic opportunity. And so point is, in the last 10 years also, Texas has gained about 2.5 million jobs. And again, to put that in perspective, that's roughly 25% of the job creation of the entire nation right here in the state of Texas. Every morning when you wake up, a hard, amazing fact and statistic to think about is every morning when you wake up, there's roughly another 1,000 to 1,200 people in Texas every single day. So every time you wake up for the next week, just think about that. Every time you wake up, roughly there's another 1,000 to 1,200 people a day. Half of those are natural growth. Half of those are people that moved to the state of Texas from either the other 49 states and or from somewhere across the world. And people always ask, why do people move here? And the simple answer is the same reason my family moved here in the 1840s, for an economic opportunity. So Texas entered into this downturn in a much stronger foundation and position than many other states. We were actually tracking slightly ahead of our revenue estimate for how much money we thought would come into the Treasury in February. However, as we know, things drastically changed there in the month of March. First, Texas had the first headwind to the economy, and that was a downturn in oil prices, mostly because Russia and Saudi Arabia could not agree to OPEC cuts. But then to make things worse, Saudi Arabia said they were going to increase production. So that caused a rapid deterioration in prices. And then immediately after that, as we all know, so many portions of the state economy were being shut down as social distancing was becoming part of the new lifestyle to try to deal with the healthcare side of the global pandemic. We had been watching it for quite some time. My office did a test the week before to see if we could move to teleworking. Thankfully, that worked. And so we moved the vast majority of all 3,000 of our employees to teleworking, which we are still doing today. So if you ask me, Glenn, are you in your office in Austin? No, I'm not, even though I have some flags and official. That's actually in our house here in Katy, Texas, which is where we call home and reside full time when I'm not in Austin or traveling. So the bottom line is, in the first few weeks of the downturn of March, so many businesses, nobody has in a business plan that they're going to be shut down for several days, much lower weeks on end. So as you know, Texas, like the United States, states across, had unprecedented numbers of people that were filing for unemployment, businesses that were having a rapid deterioration of their profitability. Obviously, those biggest pieces were in either the hotel, leisure, hospitality, vacation, aviation areas. So the restaurants, bars, those that were having the biggest impact. As we went into this downturn, I started telling leadership, state legislature, public, and different speeches that I've been giving that unfortunately Texas was going to enter into a recession with those dual headwinds of the lower prices in oil, as well as the global pandemic of COVID. However, we didn't know how wide, how deep, and it would take quite a while for us to be having some real data, because most of the things that we look at are unemployment levels, GDP growth, also our tax collections, and that would obviously lag in data. But I'd mentioned that we were probably going to have to revise our revenue estimate down, unfortunately, probably in the term of billions of dollars. We started looking at a lot of non-traditional data pieces. My team did a really good job looking at various things, whether how many people were going to restaurants. And obviously at first that was a good data point. And then obviously it was not, because restaurants were closed. Obviously we're still tracking that today, how many people were flying around the United States and going through our airport system. I never knew that we had roughly about 2.3 million people that used to fly here in the United States every single day on average. Unfortunately, the peak of the pandemic, we were having roughly 90,000 people a day. So from 2.3 million all the way to 90,000 was an unbelievable and unprecedented drop. That number's moved up to about a little over 750,000 people in a day, which is a significant increase from that 90,000. However, unfortunately, a much still significant downturn in the airline industry compared to what was the average of 2.3. So as we were looking for a revised revenue estimate, we saw several months had downturns in our sales tax collections, roughly a little over 9% in one month, which was economic activity in the month of March, and then economic activity in the month of April was down even further at 13%. And then the following month, as in economic activity in the month of May, was down about 6% compared to May of last year. And then in the economic activity that we had in the month of June was actually positive compared to June of last year, roughly about 4.3% increase. Now, we started looking into why is that, because we felt as though there was going to be a downturn for several different months in a row. Typically in past downturns, whether that was the great financial crisis, other recessions, usually there's about a 6-month lag or more before you start seeing negative numbers in your tax collections, because it takes a little while for the ripple effects to be felt. However, this time it was felt very quickly because businesses were closed down and so many people were either working from home or actually not getting out into the economy. Now, the reason that it was an increase in Texas in the month of June, as well as most other states, is in part either people got their additional stimulus checks, their additional unemployment benefits, and or money that they would have been spending on vacations but not going on vacation, having staycations. They've been doing home improvement projects. So the retail areas, especially home improvement areas, whether it's furniture, home gym equipment, computer equipment, those are the areas that was an increase. In the prior 2 months, Texas saw about $460 million in sales tax collections in the retail area. Obviously, more growth has been online than on-premise retail. However, retail overall had increased, but really it's centered around more projects that people are doing at home than anything else. And that $460 million increase in revenues, that translates into roughly about $7.3 billion in consumer spending. Now, I've been asked, do we think that's going to last? Actually, we don't. We think that'll play out at some point in time because there's so many projects that people will do at home. However, obviously, during this time, we're watching all facets of the economy because some, as I mentioned, have had a significant contraction. Other types of businesses, because of the greater number of people staying at home, are having an uptick in economic activity. And so therefore, we think overall in our current new revenue estimate that we had projected originally a $3 billion surplus, as in more money coming in than the state legislature spent for this current 2-year budget that ends August of next year is when the 2-year budget cycle ends. However, we think now that has been a downward revision from a $3 billion surplus in the current spending to about $4.6 billion as a deficit. Now, part of that is going to be covered by state leadership has instructed state agencies to reduce their spending. I got out very early and said that we were going to reduce our spending in the controller's office by putting in a hiring freeze, a pay freeze, reevaluating our IT projects, because I wanted to script out that other agencies need to be looking at this as well prior to leadership giving that instruction. We think that that reduction may save about $1 billion, and so therefore that will come off of that number. Other big uncertainties, unknowns, are what other types of dollars may come from the federal government. The federal government has sent a significant amount of money to the state of Texas. Some of that is for specific type purposes like public education, higher education, some other areas, as well as specifically COVID type expenses. Many other states are asking the federal government to release kind of some of the strings that it has to be spent on COVID type parameters. We've advocated for that as well, just because I think it's easier for states to react to the issues that we have if you have less parameters put on the dollars from the federal government. However, as I mentioned, Texas is in a much better cash management position than many other states. And so therefore, Texas entered into this in a stronger foundation. However, we do think it will take quite some time before the state, the national, and the global economy gets back to, unfortunately, pre-pandemic levels. Our assumptions are the economies continue to grow, continue to open up. However, we want to obviously watch in the months ahead to test the assumptions that we made in this estimate. And then lastly, all revenue estimates, especially when you're looking at a 2-year window, which is a very far out window, especially for the 9th largest economy in the entire world, is obviously very hard to predict, and one you're never going to get completely right. And so we always mention there are clouds of uncertainty, especially as you know in Beaumont, in the greater Beaumont area and Port Arthur area, is that we're very tied to the international economy with exports. Texas is roughly 19% of all the exports out of the United States. So we're very tied to that international economy. The point being is whatever happens in the rest of the world can have a beneficial or detrimental impact on our state economy. And so therefore, there are greater clouds of uncertainty now than ever before. And so that's why we really want to make sure as we go in the following months to test the economic assumptions that we've made. And one of them, as I mentioned already, is we did not expect to see a positive month for quite some time. However, we saw one, but we think that we know why we saw that, but that was a temporary. And obviously we don't know exactly what the federal government's going to do. So we haven't taken into account anything else that the federal government is talking about as far as in types of economic packages, either for states, local governments, individuals, just because until Congress passes it, as well as the president signs it, it's not finished and done, and so therefore we're not taking that into account. So how about I stop right there, and maybe we'll open it up for the question and answer session. And I know that we have some of your delegation here later on. We'll talk about their legislative portion, so look forward to participating in that as well and listening to what they have to say. So again, thanks for letting me be here, and don't mind, maybe Bill will go to the Q&A session.
So first question, what do you, the current stimulus packages that are being debated in DC mean for us in Texas? And how do the federal dollars flowing to Texas, how are those going to be managed?
So first, Texas has received, the state of Texas, not individuals, not necessarily local governments, but the state itself has and will receive roughly about $15 billion. The biggest portion of that is $6.2 billion, which is for the state of Texas for COVID type expenses. That has been very drawn just to that specific area, yet the U.S. Treasury has given 6 broader parameters and areas. However, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that I've advocated that we have some of those parameters loosened is because you always have to make sure to document those as all those there in the Beaumont area that, as we know, we've unfortunately been hit with hurricanes before, and as FEMA dollars or other federal dollars come, you have to make sure to document all that and keep it. Otherwise, those dollars will go back. And so therefore, the point being is, I think the greater flexibility that we have is important. Also, $1.8 billion in addition to the 6.2 is for local governments. Y'all may recall that the largest 16 counties and cities were able to go directly to the U.S. Treasury and get their dollars, but all the other local governments, those were flowing through the state of Texas and then ultimately flowing through the governor's office and then to the Department of Emergency Management, which obviously deals with local governments in many different facets, especially for disaster declarations. And so they're working in conjunction to pass those dollars back to local governments. But right now, to answer your question, they're all in the state treasury. My office manages all the dollars that flow through the state treasury as well as others. So they're in the state treasury. We have those in the general treasury pool overall. And as we are required to spend those, and we make sure that all state agencies are accounting for exactly COVID type expenses. Now, what may be coming up in additional federal packages is uncertain. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion and negotiation going on between the White House as well as the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress. And so therefore, exactly what comes out of that, I think we're all still trying to figure out what that may be. But any dollars that obviously come to the state of Texas and or individuals would obviously, part of that is going to go into the state economy. During a recession, people's spending typically gets slowed down. More savings occurs, which is occurring with those dollars as well, but a larger portion of them are going into the state economy.
Very good. Thank you. This is a two-parter. And before we ask the second question, for all of our live folks here today, we weren't able to let you listen to these answers to the questions. However, obviously you have the link to the thing so you can go back and listen to what Mr. Hager is talking about. So here's a two-parter for you. So Texas relies heavily on sales tax. So are we worse off than other states from a revenue standpoint? And then as a result, are you getting any pushback or requests to look at a possible income tax?
Yeah, very good question. So I'll take the latter one first. The fact is, I don't see Texas having a state income tax. One, that would be the state legislature, both the House and the Senate, would have to pass that as a 2/3 vote because it would be a change to the state constitution. Then that means you and I, the voters, would have to approve that constitutional amendment. And let's just say we don't only have just one constitutional prohibition in the state constitution against an income tax. We have 2 of them. We just passed a recent one, a second one not just very long ago. So I think the case for that is probably not very strong here in the state of Texas. The question as to the volatility of sales tax, roughly in the last 20 years, Texas has actually gained sales tax revenue on average. And I'll say that again, on average, obviously not every single year, depending on the economic conditions, but we've increased roughly on average about 5%, slightly above. However, you can also see that in the last 20 years, we've had about every 5 years, there's a downturn in our sales tax collections compared to the year prior to that. And so the point being is there's some volatility in it, just like all types of revenue streams. However, I'll say that an income tax is not necessarily more stable than a sales tax revenues. Take, for example, whether that's in California, New Jersey, just to go to those 2 states that have a state income tax. Also, the state income tax is obviously much more heavily emphasized for those of higher income. And of those that are higher income, a lot of them have capital gains. And so therefore, during a downturn in the market, obviously there's not as much capital gains. And so my point being is actually the revenues into those states from a state income tax is as volatile, if not really even worse, because of that capital gains portion than here in the state of Texas.
Very good. Thank you. And you mentioned this a little bit in your presentation, but what indicators are you monitoring and how are you gathering data to project, how things are going to happen with the economy moving forward in these uncertain times?
Yeah, so very early on, kind of as I mentioned, we look at a lot of different economic indicators, tremendous number of economic indicators, but some of the most consistent ones to see what the health of the economy is either growth or stagnation in GDP here in the state of Texas, as well as the United States, obviously. Unemployment or employment numbers, as we all know, in February of this year, Texas had a historical low unemployment of roughly 3.4%. That had moved up to roughly about 13%, that has slid back to a little over 8% right now as more people have gone back to work. But obviously, unfortunately, 8% is not acceptable because of compared to that historical low, but it's going to be a while, unfortunately, before we get to that. And then also we look at our revenues. And so since all of those lag, my team started looking at a lot of non-traditional economic indicators, as I mentioned earlier, as in one, how many people are going to restaurants. Right now, we're also looking at mobility. How many people are getting out and being mobile in the economy compared to where they were before? How many people of part-time workers? There's some companies that have released their information that they work with for people that are part-time or hourly employees with businesses. So they've released some of that data and to help us track how many of those people are getting back to work. And then also, as I mentioned, we were looking at how many people are flying around the United States, TSA data, how many people are staying in hotels compared to where they were before. And so at least those are just snapshots, but it gives us at least an indication. As we see from week to week, some of those numbers improve. But again, as I kind of remind people again, even though we see some very large gains in some of those areas, we're still not quite to the pre-pandemic levels, unfortunately, and will not be for quite some time. So we're looking at a lot of different things and data points. I was real proud of my team because a lot of these different data points they went and found there in the month of March, so us to start to get a better understanding of what was going on in the state economy. And then in the months, 2-3 months later, you start seeing some data points entering into other people talking about them as they're trying to figure out. Because I'll give you one example. We use several different services to help us track where we think the Texas and the U.S. economy is going. Usually they'll give us a model. This is the base model of where we think the economy is going with 2 different deviations. However, because of the uncertainty now, there'll be a base model instead of about 2 deviations. Now there'll be either 6 or 7 more deviations because there's just a lot of uncertainty. And again, not just because you're trying to figure out what's going on in the state of Texas, either from businesses and individuals and their behavior, but also that in the United States and literally around the world, and how governments, not just here in Texas, the United States, but literally governments around the world are dealing with the pandemic and how they're interfacing with the issues that they face every day and every week. But to make a point again, as I said earlier, with 19% of all the exports coming from the United States out of the state of Texas, which was the largest exporting state in the nation, supply chain issues in other nations has potential for significant disruptions here in the state of Texas. As you see, you may be going to try to buy certain consumer items and they're just not available. And a lot of that is a result of supply chain issues and disruptions in workforce.
Very good. This might be a little bit of a build on what you touched on earlier as well. But what sectors of the economy have been hardest hit? But really, what sectors are crucial to jumpstarting the economy as we emerge from the pandemic?
Those that are in hotels, leisure, hospitalities, travel industry, vacation, retail, certain retails, also restaurants, bars, those have been the ones that have been hardest hit during this time. In some of the areas, say for example, I've kind of made this point, I've heard certain pool companies and talked to them that if you're trying to get a pool right now, you're on a backlog just because more people staying home and wanting to put different things, pools in their yards. And so therefore the point being is some businesses are busier than they've ever been. Others, as I mentioned earlier, have been very significantly hit. I get the question quite frequently of what industries. And I think during this time, because we've seen a lot of research that shows that people, individuals, you and I, other individuals, are much more reluctant or hesitant to get out and engage in the economy because of the fear and concerns over COVID, more so than out of government mandated shutdowns. And so the point is, even if government doesn't mandate additional shutdowns here in the state of Texas and or the nation and or around the world, people's reluctance is there. And so, I continually encourage, we're all going to have to do things different than we've done before. As I have three children. I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. And months ago, I started making the comment that when we go out, and Glenn Hager doesn't really care to wear a mask. It's not something I've ever done, but it's what we do, not really as much for ourselves as we do for other people. And I think we're going to have to look at, life through the eyes of others and how others are concerned and behave to balance that improvement in the economy, but also counterbalance that of what we need to those that are most at risk right now and those that are most vulnerable. And how do we have that balance? And so I think the biggest constraint for the potential growth in the economy is the mindset of the consumer and how we balance the life that we're living with. Because a few months ago, the question was, would the coronavirus, COVID, somewhat disappear, not be as prevalent during the summer months? However, in the last month, we realized that's not going to happen. It's something that we're going to have to live with for quite some time, unfortunately. So how we balance our daily lives, I think, is really critical. And I think that is the most important piece for the recovery of the economy and to get back onto the traditional path that Texas has been in growth of outpacing the national average.
Very good. So last question for you, sir. And this one, I guess, would be special attention for our audience, because this is how we can help Mr. Hager. What kind of information can business leaders provide you to help you navigate your efforts and reopen the economy and estimate future economic activity?
Yeah, I would say now more than ever, some of the different issues and things that you see in your businesses or your trade associations. One of the things that I traditionally do every month when the Dallas Fed puts out their new outlook, whether it's on retail, manufacturing. I like to always read the comments, because the comments are obviously in the sector of, say, manufacturing, but not everything is in the exact same area of manufacturing, because as we know, manufacturing is very wide, very, very, very diverse. And so reading those comments sometimes kind of get a glimpse of what business individuals are thinking. So the point being of what I've encouraged all chambers is different data points that y'all have, or things that you're looking at, or what you see as the health of a particular business, or what are some of the issues that you see are more so now critical for us than ever before to get a real glimpse into that. And so therefore, whether you want to, either encourage your members to send information to you and you pass that on to my team, that would be fantastic, because we would love and appreciate that input. But also, I think now gives us a good opportunity to reevaluate how we do business. And what I mean in particularly is especially rules and regulations. It's always critical to reevaluate those, because as we know, times change, business practices change. Something that made sense 20 years ago makes absolutely no sense today in today's business environment. And so therefore, how government tries to regulate, I think, needs to be reevaluated from a lot of different fronts, to try to unleash and harness the economic opportunity that businesses can create and individuals can create. I think that is much more important now than ever before.
Very good. Mr. Hager, thanks very much for taking time to talk to our members. We've got a little token of our appreciation from Southeast Texas on its way to you. So I hope you enjoy that. So thanks again for being there and taking time. So next, we're going to hear how what Mr. Hager just talked about might impact us in Southeast Texas. So at this point, one of our presenting sponsors for the entire membership series is Energy Texas. And I'd like to invite Todd Dunkelberger, who's Manager, Texas Customer Service Support for Energy Texas, to come up to the podium and introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Bill. It's an honor to be here today, and we appreciate the opportunity as Energy Texas to be a series sponsor with the Beaumont Chamber. We enjoy the partnership that we have with our chamber, but we also have enjoyed the partnership that we have with the legislators that are here today as well. We know the importance and the roles that each play, and for our partnership with each and every one is very important to us. It's no secret that a lot of the conversation and a lot of the efforts that we're doing today is all based around the pandemic. It has absolutely consumed everything that we do, from the way we operate as a business or way we live our lives individually. We know it's had tremendous impacts on all of us. And for that, it's given us things that it's unprecedented that we've never seen before. So we're laying new groundwork as we go along. I think about my 38 years of experience with the company, and we've been through hurricanes, we've been through tornadoes, flooding events, ice storms. Whether it's here locally or all across the nation, we get the call, we go. We know what's in front of us. We know how to respond. But I've got to say, COVID has created something I've never seen before in my life. But at some point in time, we will figure this thing out, and we will conquer. But with that, we see firsthand the impact that the pandemic is actually having on our customers across Southeast Texas, but even nationally, as we hear the reports that comes out through the local media. And it reminds us daily about the importance of what our role is in the community. One of the things that we learned real early on, because of the impacts that the pandemic was actually having, Energy decided to establish a COVID Southeast Texas relief fund, where our energy shareholders actually committed $300,000 to be allocated through 9 nonprofits that will actually service customers in 22 counties. So that was one of our first attempts that we made going forward to help within the community and seeing the impacts. We also donated $10,000 to the Southeast Texas Food Bank. Dan Mayer and his group over there at the food bank has done a tremendous job in meeting the demands for those that's talked about with Mr. Egger, talking about the people who have lost their jobs or reduced hours and what they're doing. Businesses that have either shut down or are now coming back gradually at 25%, 50%. All that has just tremendous impacts what's out there and people and their ability to be able to live their lives each and every day. We also unveiled what we call our Enhanced Customer Assistance Plan. And what this does is provide flexible options to our customers that are actually having a financial hardship. One of the opportunities that we were providing is the what we call our deferred payment plan. This is an opportunity that if a customer has a financial hardship, either on their current bill or unpaid balances on their account, they can actually set up a deferred payment plan that equal up to over 12 months. So the idea is to try to smooth out that impact and not have it all come due at one time. So what customers have to do is they can either go to our Energy Texas website, or they can call the 1-800-ENERGY number and to be able to set themselves up on that type of a plan. We've also established a website that helps provide additional resources for our customers. It's all based around the COVID-19 and it identifies resources where customers have access to federal, state, and local financial assistance information. And importantly, it also includes federal funding that our low-income customers can reach out to as well. And I think about some of the communication efforts that we're making through our local constituency and our customer base. We've actually, since the middle of June, have reached out with over 750,000 contacts with our customers. And this is anything from bill inserts to surveys to understand the impacts of our small businesses, letters to our low-income customers to help inform them where they can provide or receive additional funding through what we call the LIHEAP program, which is the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, which are federal dollars that's allocated to the state that's then reallocated out to our local agencies. There we're making them aware of where some utility assistance can be provided to help them through some of the financial hardships that they're doing. So we're trying to do our part in doing that, to make them aware of the needs that are there and also where they can provide assistance. So in closing, as we respond to the pandemic, it's clear that we all takes us to work together. It takes every one of us at whatever levels that we operate from to be able to overcome the challenges that we currently face. With Energy Texas, we're working alongside everyone here to try to make that happen. So we appreciate the opportunities being here today. And Bill, thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak before you. Next, it is my astute pleasure to recognize and introduce our next speaker is Senator Brandon Creighton, who has proudly served our Senate District 4 since his victory in a special election in August of 2014. Senator Creighton has ably represented the interests of the district spanning Harris, Chambers, Jefferson, and most of Montgomery and Galveston counties. During his tenure as a senator, he has taken the lead on key issues that matters to the Texas job creators, including franchise and property tax relief, water and transportation infrastructure, and border security. He previously served as the chairman of the House Federalism Committees tasked with overseeing the state's relationship with the federal government and protecting the Texas constitutional rights. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Senator Brandon Creighton.
Thanks, Todd, very much. It's great to be here with everyone to visit about some of the upcoming issues we're going to be covering in the legislative session in January. I think, Todd was very accurate in talking about how, in any update, it's impossible not to mention the impact of coronavirus and how the battle against COVID-19 is currently shaping up. And we have a great studio audience with us today. Avi, how's it going at CHRISTUS? And good to see you, and very busy, I know. And just want to thank all the sponsors that are supporting getting us all together and just continuing to be great partners in making sure that all of our business owners have the information that they need to make decisions, right? I mean, it's one of the most difficult things we can ever be faced with as business owners is to have, less than stable ground beneath us as we make decisions day in and day out. And we try to make the best decisions we can make to grow and our business and support the efforts of others in the community, but to make life make sense with all the risks in a perfect world and the precautions we have to take and all of the decisions we have to make to just make business make sense when the economy is sound and strong and consistent during a pandemic, which many of us in elected leadership, we're always trying to envision not only what we need to do to prepare for unknowns, especially at the state capitol and the legislature in Austin, but to predict, what we may be faced with in the interim as we're in session 5 months every other year, as the controller mentioned. And we different than other states that may be in session 8 or 9 months a year, just as Washington is as well. Texas is there less, and that forces us to push our priorities to the top. It forces us to have urgency with the actions that we take because we're there on a limited time frame to make decisions, and it forces us to be, in a situation where we have to predict when we leave session what are the issues that most Texans are going to face, and how will our state budget and the tools and resources that we provide in the legislature during session, how will that all prop up, our hardworking families and our business owners to have the best chance to succeed. And then hopefully government steps out of the way in the best way that it can and allows Texans and our entrepreneurs and our families to do what they do best, which is to grow businesses and to produce and to create opportunity for others through job creation and other endeavors and investment and to make sure our economy grows. So many of us see a lot of movies in the sci-fi category, and we've seen it for years on on situations that might predict a pandemic, right? A global pandemic. But in years past, if we would have all been working on just that in the legislative session, many Texans might ask, why aren't you working on the real issues of the day, right? We've got public education and healthcare and transportation and so much that's included in this 9th or 10th largest economy in the world that we call Texas. And so I think as a state, we have been very prepared for outcomes where we know in Southeast Texas, we're battle tested, aren't we? I mean, we've had some of the largest storms in American history hit the United States in the last few years, but Southeast Texas found itself to be the dirtiest side of that storm that was the worst storm in American history. And we've had other storms since then. And we've been resilient and we've been, proactive. And I think we've shown the rest of the world in fascinating ways to them how Texans can come together and help each other in times that are very, very difficult. So back to the pandemic, we are in a battle against coronavirus, and under many of the data points, we're winning this battle. We're doing a very good job, thankfully, thanks to our healthcare professionals and our first responders and our community that's working together to follow CDC guidelines and to just do the best that we can to keep everyone safe and healthy while we take steps to promote what our families need day in and day out and to prop up and support our businesses. And we can't lose sight of both of those goals at the same time. You have about a 6 to 8% chance of getting coronavirus. If you do and you have symptoms, you have a 99% chance of survival in Harris County, in Dallas County, in Tarrant County, in Travis County, in so many heavy metropolitan counties around the state, high dense population areas. And then separate from that, there are 29 million other Texans that don't have coronavirus, that have all of these issues that are so devastating to them under the categories of a threat to their business, their jobs, their employment, their families, their kids, all under the categories of unemployment that we see day in and day out, that all of us, as we're speaking out towards helping others with the issue of coronavirus, which we need to and should have to, and in all categories, make sure that everyone that's health risk vulnerable is safe and that everyone around them is doing things practicing guidelines that will keep those family members and loved ones safe. But again, our business owners need a voice, our families that don't have coronavirus need a voice, and our kids need a voice. And in so many of those categories, we're going to enter session in January, and we're going to continue the discussions that we're having now that will help us decide what issues do we push to the top of the list, knowing that if we usually consider 7,000 bills during session that lawmakers enter the Capitol and file as the newest ideas for how to make Texas a better state and how to keep us out front economically and to keep us safe and to keep us growing in infrastructure, all things education, healthcare, the big budget drivers and the big concerns for most Texans. How do we push the priorities to the top of the list, knowing that the budget is going to be a major concern and so many things related to our state's economy and propping up Texans to be able to make a difference as entrepreneurs and everyone that goes to work every day is the sound principles of basic services being met in that state budget, that our universities are well funded, that our public schools are funded to the extent that they need to be, that our roads and bridges and dams are secure and sound, our infrastructure, that we're building forward for a better future, that our tax policies are sound, and that they real time recognize how Texans are struggling and then balance together with the fact that tax revenue helps us maintain a very lean historic state budget that grows within or under inflation and has for years, and is also a balanced budget that is sort of a novel idea among governments at the state level, and certainly in Washington, D.C. these days. We don't see many states prioritize the state budget, and many times at the federal level, there may not be a budget presented in a given year. So with Texas leading the pack on economic upside and job creation, in tax reform, in the way that we run state government, and then step out of the way for another year and a half to allow Texans to do what they do best, and hopefully have government standing aside to allow that to happen with us as few infringements on freedom and liberty as possible. We also will have to consider, how are we set up for managing a pandemic through the governor's office, through our emergency operations center at all the local government levels, and do we find that we have placed authority in the right places for a crisis? And I think the rest of the nation is, and certainly the president continues to talk about how Texas is managing itself in a very positive way with great outcomes through all of this. But we like to get a trophy for first place for sure. And as Texans, we don't consider it bragging if it's true. But we also recognize that we're self-depreciating, and that we understand that if there are ways we can continue to improve, it's not really about how we're compared to our other peers among the states. It's, can we be better on a daily basis, and as elected leaders and community leaders and business leaders, can we do a better job and have better policies in place for the things that may affect us the most, and certainly our families, when we're in a crisis situation, a pandemic, a hurricane aftermath, whatever it might be, as Southeast Texans are the most battle-tested and the most capable of leading others through sort of the smoke on the racetrack. When there's a wreck, you have to get around it, drive through it, do whatever you can, and continue around the track and continue to make life make sense. So when we come into session, we're going to see a reevaluation of procurement of contracts during a pandemic. We're going to see a reevaluation of how our budget dollars are spent, how state and local government works together in enforcing and creating ordinances and mandates that may conflict with one another. I asked recently for Attorney General Ken Paxton to issue a letter opinion, a legal opinion, on whether or not local governments simply can they issue ordinances during an emergency declaration that contradict with state law, current state law on the books. In other words, can they rewrite statute during an emergency declaration? And the answer was no. Again, we have to be nimble, and we have great local leaders, we have great state leaders, and we have many differences of opinion, but that's healthy. The differences of opinion and handling those differences with civility are the ways that we can work through the toughest issues as Texans. And many of us have been in working groups where there is a lack of civility or a lack of agreement, and that group may fall apart. It may not get their goals accomplished. They may leave not speaking with one another. That's not what Texans expect of their elected officials, and we're going to continue to work through the policies that we have in place and continue to vet what we are doing to handle a pandemic or a healthcare crisis so that we're better prepared next time around. Public education will always be at the top of the list on how we develop more efficient funding strategies for our schools in times of less revenue. Higher education, how we fund our colleges and universities, the same. In the Senate, I chair the Higher Education Committee, and I work with our chancellors and our presidents and our universities and colleges to not only develop better policies for our university campuses and our colleges, but also to tie together what our future Texas workforce is going to look like and how we prepare them, and what we are doing to create a better economic engine for Texas going forward. And all of those concepts and principles and sort of suggested policy changes happen in the Texas legislative session. So very important stuff. And again, it goes back to 7,000 bills filed during an average legislative session. Normally there's about 1,000 to 1,200 of those that pass into law. But this time around, we're going to have probably less attended hearings. We're going to be following CDC guidelines in the Capitol. We will have less foot traffic. We will have, I would say, less public hearings in the interim, which is the way we really educate ourselves and get prepared for the legislative session. And so knowing all of that, we're going to see less bills pass this legislative session. So with that being the case, we're all passionate about the ideas that we care about most. So who are the winners and losers there as we prioritize what matters most in that legislative session? The budget is the only bill that has to be passed. So we will reconcile what Representative Deschatel and what Representative Phelan, what they prioritize in the budget in House Bill 1. We will reconcile that with the Senate budget and Senate Bill 1, and we will meet in the middle and work on a compromise budget, and that will be eventually, when passed, what goes to the governor's desk for hopefully his approval. So with that, I think that we're all going to continue to be at the front of the line on trying to make sure that Texas continues to take steps and evolve and advance on behalf of business owners. Because we understand in Texas, we're a pro-business state as we're a pro-family state, and we understand those are inextricably linked. 75% of our businesses are small businesses, and that we have to, if we want Texas families and Texas children to have a fighting chance during tough times, then our businesses have to have a fighting chance. And someone has to speak for all of them, as we are also speaking for everyone that may be a health risk, health vulnerable, and certainly for all of us to continue policies that keep us safe day to day. And we have to balance all of that together. And it's a tough challenge, but we can do it because we work together the good old Southern way. We're going to handle our business and take care of each other and respect each other and work with civility in tough times and get it done. So with that, I wanted to open up for questions because I know Chairman Deschatel has some good remarks as well.
Well, first of all, we're going to take questions at the very end, Senator Creighton. Okay. So we're going to let everybody get a chance to weigh in. But I want to thank you very much for your presentation. But probably more than that, since we've met, and every time it happened today, the first thing that comes out of your mouth after we greet each other is, what can I do to help? I really appreciate that. So thank you, and don't leave because we've got some questions for you in a minute.
Great. Thank you.
Very good. So next up, our other presenting sponsor for the year is Common Sense Credit Union. And I forgot to use the word again because it's the second year, so we really appreciate that. And Tish Cornell, who's the marketing specialist for Common Sense, is here. Please come on up to the podium and introduce our next presenter.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, I'm Tish Cornell. I'm marketing specialist at Common Sense Credit Union. We were originally known as the Goodyear Credit Union. We were a little kiosk there within the Goodyear plant 57 years ago. So for 57 years, we have been serving our community, Jefferson and Chambers counties, and we have a passion for building strong partnerships with our members as well as other organizations in the community. As Senator Creighton said, it's always good to practice what just makes sense, and that's actually our tagline. So during times of adversity and times of uncertainty, it just makes sense whenever you're in a community to come together and find out what is best for everyone involved. So we are very proud to be a part of the Greater Beaumont Chamber of Commerce and in the company of other esteemed local businesses in our community. I'm very honored to be here today and to introduce Representative Joe Deschatel. Representative Deschatel represents the 72nd that word right? 22nd Legislative District, which includes part of Jefferson and Orange counties. He is a successful attorney, businessman, and lifelong resident of Beaumont. In the 86th legislative session, Representative Desitel was appointed to one of the most coveted committees, the House of Calendars, which gave him the opportunity to help structure the items brought to the House floor for debate. He also serves on the Human Services Committee and State Affairs Committee. During the 86th interim, he was reappointed to be a member of the Joint Committee on the Coastal Barrier System. Please help me welcome Representative Joe Desitel.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I'll try not to repeat anything that the senator said. We all know we're in a different world now, and as legislators, we've been talking amongst ourselves and staff as how we're going to handle this upcoming session. I mean, we've heard rumors. We know that we've heard we might meet in the urban center, you know, for social distancing or some other buildings, so that we can't fathom how that's going to really work, because if any of you witnessed or were present during legislative sessions when we were actively on the floor, you know, we have points of order and things of that, and we have, you know, we just kind of huddle up in corners together or at the speaker's desk and argue, and people are shouting at each other. All that stuff is things we shouldn't be doing now, according to CDC guidelines and because of the pandemic. So we're not really even sure how we're gonna function. I mean, the rules that say where you stand to lay out a bill versus where you ask questions and how many people can be there, all that is kind of thrown out the window. And we're trying to say, well, how are we going to do this? The Constitution doesn't really give us authority to have a session like we're doing this meeting, you know, a virtual session where I'm sitting in Beaumont and Senator Creighton sitting in Montgomery County, or the Senate, or another House member, Mays is in Galveston, and he's voting from Galveston, I'm voting from, you know what I mean? We can't do that. We're not set up as the Constitution to allow us to vote in absentia from the House floor where we're convened. So we're studying that. We haven't had to say any amount, Brandon, any committee meetings as such. I've been to one committee meeting that was prior to the March when things started to shut down. We had a regular committee meeting. Now we don't know how the public is going to interact. You know, the legislature is a public body. We aren't allowed to meet in secret and do state's business where the public can't be present. Whenever we try to make laws and things of that nature. So how do we give the public the ability to participate in a hearing on an issue? Our State Affairs Committee meeting, and we're looking at utility rates or something of that nature. How do we do that and let John Q. Citizen know what is give their viewpoint on how it's going to affect them? And that is what we have to do as a legislature. The people we represent should have the right to come before us and say, oh, this is good for our community, or this is bad for our community. So everything's upended. We're trying to figure out ways to let people participate. As the senator said, the only bill we have to pass constitutionally is a state budget. But that's never been the case. We've always had other bills. This session, we probably won't have as many. I don't know that how are we going to handle that. I don't know that if we're going to adopt rules maybe at the beginning of the session, limiting the number of bills each member can file. That's a possibility. I mean, I haven't heard that, but we certainly at the beginning of each session, we have prior to the session starting after the election, there's a rules committee that's appointed, and they come up with rules for us to adopt. There may be one way of doing it where we have to prioritize, and we can only file X number of bills per person. We don't know what we're going to do about that. I know the virus has exposed some things that some of us worked hard to make known, but I think the need for health care has been exacerbated or exposed, the need for additional Medicaid dollars for the hospitals and doctors and healthcare that's available from the federal government that Texas has resisted accepting in the past. We may very well have to accept. Looking because of our budget shortfalls, looking at the windstorm issue, which we were very fortunate last week that the committee decided not to raise our rates, but they can meet again and raise our rates. I've carried a bill the last 2 or 3 sessions that have dealt with casino gambling in Texas, with part of those revenues going toward windstorm, underwriting the windstorm costs. It might be something that gets more traction this time because of the budget situation. You know, I've always said that when it's going to take a budget crisis before we pass casino gambling. If for some reason it appears that our morals are tied to our pocketbook. You know, if we got a lot of money, we're a lot more moral than if we don't. Oh, gambling's immoral, but if you broke, it's okay. So we'll see what happens this legislative session, because that can bring significant revenue. And I've always argued on the negative side of gambling is that we already have it. If a person wants to gamble and is addicted to gambling and it's costing their family, they're doing it in Louisiana and bringing the problem over to Texas. They're gambling in Louisiana. We get all the social problems that are attached to gambling, but we get none of the benefits that are attached to it. It doesn't make any sense to me. That we could take sort of part of that revenue for counseling and things like that for those people who can't handle it. But they're going across every state bordering Texas has gambling, and we have all the problems and none of the benefits. I never did understand that, but that's the situation we're in. So we're going to be looking at Medicaid expansion if we could get more federal dollars, and I hope we can convince our colleagues to accept those and put those matching dollars up to get billions of dollars back into Texas. And education, I'm glad that to see the governor gave pretty much each school district the ability to decide on when school is going to open and not forcing it upon, because one size can't fit all here in Texas. Texas is too big. We have hot spots of the coronavirus. We have areas where it's not really causing a problem. And so pretty much the school districts are now able to look at the medical condition in their on a school by school basis and makes decisions whether it's going to be virtual, whether it's going to be open, and gave them some latitude. And some of the cities now are able to enforce mask ordinances and things like that, because we can't have a one size fits all on a state this size and as diverse as Texas is. I'm looking forward to the legislative session. I know that there's some things we have to do. We need to clarify some powers of the governor. We have to be able to be better prepared for a crisis like this. That, you know, we've had hurricanes, we've had things like that, and we know how to deal with them. But this pandemic situation and who had the power to do what? Do cities have the power to, you know, make laws based upon what's going on in their locality, which may be different 100 miles away? And how do we handle that in a fair and equitable way? We're going to be looking at all of that as well, as the senator alluded to. I'm going to be back with some employment legislation that we talked to, primarily this ban the box bill is starting to get traction, where that is, you don't put on your application that you've been convicted. That comes up in the interview to give you an opportunity to at least get your foot in the door. In many situations, I think what happens if a company is going to hire 5, 6, 7 people and they have a stack of 50 applications, and right at the top is checked convicted, it's thrown away. I mean, it's thrown over to the side when that might be the best person there. May have been a hot check or some low-level offense 15 years ago, 5 years ago, and that person would be their best employee. All this simply does is that's not going to be on there. But when that person comes in and you get to question them and find out about them and say, you can ask them then, and they say, and they have an opportunity to explain, yes, I was with some friends and this is what happened. Well, that happened to me as well. I'm just lucky I didn't get caught. You don't get to do all those things. And so people are trapped in a cycle of unemployment, which leads in many cases to crime or criminal activity because they keep trying, and keep getting slapped down for some small mistake they made. So I'm beginning to get some support in the business community for that concept or some variation of that. So I definitely want to continue working on that area, and we're working with industry because of the shortfall in workers. We're working with industry on what we can do with people who maybe we can get records expunged at a higher rate and things of that nature, and working with the prison system on repatriating people, getting them back in and cutting down on recidivism and having some job opportunities that are available, because we're going to have a severe labor shortage for the expansions that we're facing here along the Gulf Coast. So those are some of the things that I'm looking forward to working on, and we're going to be here. I think you have 2 more of us to hear from, so I don't want to go on too long, but thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the support. Thank you all sponsors for sponsoring and helping the chamber, because the chamber is very important to developing business in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Destel, and thanks very much for being so readily accessible when we were going through all the work on TWIA here recently. So, and I know we can count on you for that. So appreciate it, and stick around. We have a couple questions for you as well. So thanks again to Common Sense and Energy Texas for being our presenting series sponsors for the year. Next, our event sponsor for this luncheon is Sempra LNG, and we have Kelly Prass, our External Affairs for Sempra LNG, with us today to make a couple comments and introduce our next speaker. Kelly?
Thank you, Bill. First of all, just wanted to say on behalf of Sempra Energy and its Port Arthur LNG projects in Southeast Texas, we're so thrilled to be here and also be a member of the chamber. We are living in unprecedented times right now, and it is amazing to the point that the senator made earlier, all the efforts that businesses are having to undertake just to stay in business. Right now, we've got people down in Sabine Pass moving a 4-mile portion of the Texas Highway 87, and it's amazing to see the level of things that have had to be put into place to keep everybody working safe. I'm happy to report that since November, when we started this project, we are almost done laying all that rock out there to form that new portion of the highway. And locally, we're trying to do our part. And numbers to date are about $8 million locally spent in Jefferson County on this highway. So we're going to continue to do our part. I loved what Entergy said earlier about not only doing your part from a business standpoint and keeping businesses in business, but we got to help our nonprofits too. And so I'm also happy to work for a company that is so generous. In April, we were able to make donations of more than $250,000 in Jefferson County to nonprofits that are helping keeping our families safe. And that's seniors and children and parents taking care of children. I just can't imagine being a parent right now with a kindergartner in class and how you do kindergarten remotely. I want to sit with that parent and give them a few gold stars. So unprecedented times, and just appreciate all the things that not only the chamber is doing to keep us connected and keep us focused on the issues, but also businesses helping out other businesses and keeping everybody in business, which I think should be the theme of the rest of this year. Anyway, I have the great honor of introducing Representative Dade Phelan. Representative Phelan was born and raised in Southeast Texas. His fourth-generation commercial real estate development firm owns and manages retail, industrial, and office property in Texas and Arkansas. He received his bachelor's degree in government and business from the University of Texas at Austin. Phelan currently serves as chair of the House Committee on State Affairs, and Texas Monthly recently recognized Phelan as one of the best legislators in 2019. Mr. Phelan is a two-time governor appointee to and a former president of the Lower Neches Valley Authority. And if you have the opportunity to sit with him and speak with him, he's just an all-around great guy to know. At this time, I'd like to introduce him and ask you to play his video. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Beaumont Chamber of Commerce, for having me today to talk about the 2021 87th legislative session and what I may think may happen over the 140 days that convenes in January. I can tell you there are some these are pretty trying times with COVID-19 and the uncertainty that it has put us all in. It spills over into the next session. I've been on multiple calls with the chair of the House Administration Committee, which oversees operations within the Capitol, and we're not certain really how the session may even unfold for us legislators and for the public. You know, how will committee hearings be held? Will they be held? And at what capacity? Will testimony be taken via the internet like Zoom calls? You know, how will we interact on the floor? Will we be on the floor like we normally are? How will we be voting? Will there be partitions, masks, face shields, you name it? Will the public be allowed in the building at all? So these are a lot of concerns, and it's going to have a big impact on how we debate these very serious issues that we find ourselves in 2021. We know what COVID-19 has done to the budget. At one point, we had about a $5 billion surplus. Now we are close to a $5 billion deficit, depending on the numbers on any given day. Some of those numbers are improving, sales tax receipts, so maybe we get a little closer to a manageable deficit as we start the 2021 session, but there will be budget cuts. There's no doubt about it. We have a balanced budget in Texas, and we have to balance it, expenditures and receipts. They have to match up. So, COVID-19, it wreaked havoc on our public education system. It's the deficit's going to impact transportation, healthcare, public safety, the core functions of government will all take a lot of scrutiny. We also come upon redistricting, and every 10 years the census comes out, and we take those numbers and we draw lines for congressional seats and House and Senate seats, and that's been delayed a little bit. We may not get the numbers until July. And that will probably mean a special session, maybe several special sessions, if we're not already in one for the budget as well. It's tough to write legislation during the interim when you're not having hearings as well. So we're really going to be at a frantic pace come January. I don't think we'll get it all done. I think we'll have several chances to fix what we didn't get done in special sessions. But truthfully, between COVID-19, the budget, and redistricting, I'm not sure much what else we can get done that are big, heavy lifts. I'd love to address TWIA like we always want to and keep eating that elephant one bite at a time. We've come a long way in a very short time span over the last 6 years, and I want to continue to work on that and revisit any Harvey legislation. Some of the flood infrastructure stuff we worked on, see if any of that needs to be improved or tweaked, and just to continue to support public education and higher education, which I think are vital to Southeast Texas. So it's going to be very trying session. We have an election coming up in November that may decide a leadership change in the House. It's going to be difficult to really forecast how that shakes out, but Republicans only have an 8-seat majority right now. So if we lose 9 seats, then we'll have a Democratic speaker for the first time in 20 years. And so that will certainly impact what comes to the floor next session as well. So I appreciate y'all having me. My office is always open. We're always here to hear your comments and concerns. And we certainly want to continue that through next session. Even if, visitors are limited at the Capitol, you can always reach me through phone or email, and I've been doing Zoom calls with many of the interested parties in Southeast Texas. I did one with the realtors just this past week, the Southeast Texas Board of Realtors. So if any organization would like to do a Zoom call to discuss legislation for next session, please contact my office. I'd be happy to do so. Again, thank you all for having me, and have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Video for us, knowing that he couldn't be here, so we really appreciate him taking the time to do that. So I'm going to move on to our next group of sponsors. Our gold sponsors for this event are Beaumont Emergency Center and Do Good Federal Credit Union. Thanks to both of those organizations for supporting us today. And we have Ronnie Stevenson, Director of Marketing and Public Affairs at Beaumont Emergency Center, joining us to make a couple comments and introduce our last speaker. Ronnie?
Thank you. And we are honored and excited to be here and to be a part of the chamber as well, and to be here with all of you guys. You're amazing. And I think that our community is really emerging, and we have this footprint that is incredible. And we're excited to represent Texas and who Texans are in the midst of all of this COVID corona chaos. I'm excited to introduce Representative Middleton. He is a 7th generation Chambers County resident and Texan. Mays is president of the Middleton Oil Company, an independent oil and gas company. He also runs his ranching, cattle, and farming operations. He and his wife support numerous community organizations and faith-based charities. Mays was elected to the Texas House in 2018 to represent House District 23, encompassing Chambers County and part of Galveston County. Representative Middleton was appointed to the House Committees on Urban Affairs, Election, and Local and Consent Calendars. Representative Middleton was also appointed to serve on the Policy Committee of the Texas House Republicans Caucus.
Hey, well, thank y'all for having me on today. Looks like I'm having some issues with my camera here, but I just got to say what a great chamber y'all have. I've been working with Bill ever since I got started a couple of years ago in the legislature, fight TWIA and a lot of other issues that help small businesses in our community. And, you know, all of us on the coast have to stick together, right? I mean, it's tough to make our voice heard sometimes in Austin, but the chamber in Beaumont is doing an awesome job at that. And it was really good to see my colleagues, Senator Creighton and Phelan and Deshotel, and we got a really strong Gulf Coast delegation in Austin. And last session, we were fortunate to pass a number of reforms with TWIA. Maybe we should rename TWIA. I think it's probably more properly named the Texas Windstorm Insurance Lobbyist Association, because unfortunately for a long time the insurance lobby directed a lot of what TWIA did, which really explained what's wrong over there. So, you know, we all know we live on the Gulf Coast. Windstorm insurance is like a tax. Look, you can't have a mortgage without windstorm insurance. And, you know, property taxes have gone up, and this is on top of it. You know, it's a basic affordability issue for living on the Gulf Coast. And it's getting out of people's reach, frankly, because when you stack on increasing property taxes with increasing TWIA rates, we can't live there anymore. We can't have a community anymore. So this is a basic home ownership and private property rights issue. And it's really a fight we've got to win to protect small businesses too on the Gulf Coast, because they have to be able to afford to do business on the Texas Gulf Coast. So, you know, we did have some wins this past session. House Bill 1900 was one of the biggest ones. I bet y'all have heard of that before. So the biggest way TWIA was frankly taking advantage of us was the modeling. Where else have we seen bad modeling and how that hurts the economy lately? I think we're seeing it a lot, especially with small businesses. So what TWIA was doing, and this is pretty unbelievable, is they're buying reinsurance, which is like your excess liability. It's like your umbrella insurance. That was a quarter of your premium, and a quarter of it was being wasted because the person doing the modeling or setting up the modeling was the same company that was selling the reinsurance. So of course what they were doing is inflating the modeling, making it look bad, so we would have to pay for a lot of reinsurance that they would profit off of, basically. So that's what House Bill 1900 addressed, and it said, look, can't do that anymore. They can only pass on to us as ratepayers up to the 100-year storm, which is sort of your average small hurricane. So up to the 100-year average storm. So 1 in 100 years, 1 in 100 PML is what it's called. And then anything in excess of that has to go to the insurance company. So the intent of that should have cut our reinsurance costs dramatically. So just the numbers that I have, that should have saved ratepayers about $176 million between 2019 and 2020, which is savings that should be accrued to us. Unfortunately, what happened? TWIA played with the modeling again. So they inflated the 1 in 100-year storm to increase it in a way where all of the reinsurance cost, minus a little bit, maybe $7 million, got passed on to us, the ratepayers. Because before, what should have happened and what the intent of House Bill 1900 was, is that the insurance companies would have to absorb nearly 100% of that reinsurance cost, which is, of course, 25% of your premium. So that's a big fix this past session that we passed, but obviously TWIA is not following the way we intended it. That's going to have to be corrected next session. The good news is we've had 0% in rate increases for the last 3 years. So thanks to hard work of the coastal legislators on this Zoom meeting today, and thanks to the hard work of the chambers and the small businesses and the communities along the Gulf Coast, we have made our voice heard, and there's been a 0% rate increase. That was just voted on again this August in Galveston, a 0% rate increase. But this fight is not over. We have to remain vigilant. The TWIA board has discussed raising rates again, possibly as soon as October. The good news, though, is that we have asked TWIA to hire an independent actuarial firm to fairly determine this modeling. Modeling is the problem. There were 4 companies that went out for bid. 3 of them, unfortunately, were associated with the old Guy Carpenter company that was the one that was frankly benefiting off the reinsurance. The good news is they hired the one truly independent one that will run this modeling, hurricane modeling, independently. And the hope is that the thumb is no longer on the scale to justify higher rates. Because again, it's all about the modeling. It's really easy to put your thumb on the scale and say that, look, the rate increases are justified because here's the modeling. Basically, the ends justify the means. If you want it to be that way with modeling, that's wrong. So I'm hopeful that Willis Towers Watson, the new actuarial firm, will come back with fair numbers and show us a rate at least stable, 0% increase, or maybe even a decrease. We'll have to see. We'll see what comes back from their actuarial report. The second big thing and big change that's happened recently is we found out that TWIA has 8% interest junk bonds. Now, of course, when you have like a high interest credit card, you pay it down first. Well, they weren't doing that. They were holding on to that, and it was costing us an incredible amount of interest and premiums. So what we found out is that TWIA was intentionally not paying down that debt to help out the insurance companies. And that's seems kind of counterintuitive, but the way that works is if we build up TWIA savings account by not paying down that debt, the ratepayers still have to pay that 8% debt. And then it prevents the insurance companies from having to do an assessment after a storm. So that saves the insurance companies money. So we called them out over that, and luckily they're coming our direction. They recently paid down $45 million of that high 8% interest debt. That saves ratepayers $3.7 million per year. So that's a big step forward. Now we still have about another $200 or so million of that high interest rate debt. Hopefully we can get that paid off soon. Our policy goal, and this is something we should probably put in legislation next session, saying that they have to pay down high interest rate debt first and as quickly as possible. And if that happens, and if those 8% interest rate bonds are paid down, that could lower our rates by 20%. This is very meaningful. So between the modeling and the high interest rate debt, that's about 40% of your rates right there. So if we fix those two things, we have done a lot of good work to hopefully lower your TWIA rate. So there's more battles next session. Obviously, we need to get TWIA to follow House Bill 1900, which was our big reform last session that I talked about earlier. We need to change the law and require that their underwriting profits pay down those basically junk bond 8% interest rate bonds that are unfortunately inflating our rates. And frankly, I think we need to force TWIA to move their headquarters to the Gulf Coast. They're paying, I have it right here, they're paying about $1.5 million a year in rent. That's at our expense for Austin real estate. Well, let's move them to some cheaper Gulf Coast real estate. Get them out of Austin, save the taxpayers some money, save the ratepayers some money. And also they have to be in our community. You know, I mean, when they're having to live through hurricanes where their roof is getting blown off, right now they treat us like they really don't care about us a lot of times. And if they're having to live through that themselves, TWIA employees are, I think we may have some different outcomes over there. We also have to disallow rate changes while the board is not fully filled. So we have a TWIA board where we have 3 dedicated seats for Gulf Coast consumer representatives. So unfortunately, right now, they're allowed to vote on a rate increase with our voice diminished. Now, they hadn't done that yet with the coastal representatives, but it could happen. So that's an important change. We also need to make sure and finally prohibit, we've done it through pressure, frankly, by hiring Willis Towers Watson, that new actuarial firm, but we need to make sure that whoever TWIA is buying reinsurance from is not involved at all with hurricane modeling. That needs to be prohibited. That's a clear conflict of interest, and it's always at the expense of ratepayers. We also need to disallow this new loss adjustment that they implemented. So after we passed our reform last session, they instituted a 15% loss adjustment expense that they're building into our premiums for the hurricane modeling. That's a cost passed on to us, and it's frankly made up. We need to get rid of that. It's not right. And these are just some of the reforms. There are many more that need to occur. In the meantime, we can make sure that TWIA follows House Bill 1900. There are some interim charges that have been submitted to the House Insurance Committee. We need everybody's input in that, and it involves whether or not they're following House Bill 1900. I believe they are not right now, but I believe they could be with the outcome of the new actuarial firm that they just hired. So we need to hold them to it. And make sure that they're following the intent of the reforms last session, especially with buying reinsurance, because they're buying too much and they're passing that cost on to us, and that causes higher rates. So it's really that simple. There are a lot of other reforms next session, but we're here to fight for you. Dave Phelan, Brandon Creighton, Joe Deshotel, Larry Taylor, so many people up and down the Gulf Coast, all the way down to Brownsville. We're in this fight together. And we need to be vigilant for the October meeting that's likely to occur when they look at rates again. And that meeting is going to occur because of the new actuarial firm. In other words, they want to look at the results that come out of that new actuarial firm and out of the TWIA actuarial committee. So we can't let our guard down. No rate increases for the past 3 years. We got to hold them to the reforms we passed. And then we have other reforms and clearly loopholes they found and laws that we've already passed that we need to fix next session. So we have a lot of work to do with TWIA, but we got to do it because this is a basic private property rights and homeownership rights on the Gulf Coast issue where, frankly, we are being taxed out of living on the Gulf Coast if property taxes and TWIA rates keep going up. So we got to fight for this, and I appreciate all y'all's help. I appreciate the Beaumont Chamber's help. Y'all have been instrumental. Our neighboring Port Arthur chamber has been instrumental as well, and I just thank y'all for all your help on this. And I think the legislators that are on this call's help for all their help in getting those reforms done last session, and I know they're ready for the fight next session. So thank y'all for having me on today.
Thank you, Representative Middleton. Very much appreciate that. So I know we're running a little late, but we've got a couple questions that I want to get out to our panel now, I guess you would call it. So I'm going to direct these specifically to each of you. Senator Creighton, do you feel that the state of Texas will continue to see relief in environmental overregulation that could ultimately impact our future energy demands?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, checking, yes, my mic is on, but yeah, yes, I think it's a great question. You know, the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, is the second largest environmental protection agency in the world, second to the EPA. And, you know, we would hope and strive for Texas always to be a state that safeguards the public, that is responsible with the environment, but also as a state that is set up to allow business to advance and to take steps to grow and produce and to do what it does best, which is to provide much needed natural resources to the public in all the ways that we're dependent upon it. So I think Texas does a great job in a simple recipe of a balanced budget, of keeping taxes low and keeping regulatory reform in check. And we do our best to work together in Austin to make sure every session that is a top priority, and it will continue to be.
Very good. Thank you. Representative Destel, and you talked a little bit about this. This is perfect. What's your perspective on former House Bill 5 regarding opportunities for early education exposure to careers in the technical or skilled fields?
Well, House Bill 5, I think, was a great turning point in public education, where it allowed for pathways for students who may not were going to be four-year college, going to a four-year institution. What it allowed was, I think it was 5 pathways. If a student was interested in industry, there was a pathway for industry. If they were interested in the arts, it was a pathway for that, or the sciences. And whichever pathway they took, once they graduated from high school, they were eligible to go to college. Prior to House Bill 5, if you didn't go down a certain pathway for you graduated from high school, you got a waiver from the curriculum. Graduated from high school, had a high school diploma, but you couldn't go to college because you didn't follow that particular pathway that you didn't think you wanted. The good thing about House Bill 5, whichever pathway is the parent and student chose, usually in the 8th grade, once they completed that curriculum, they could go to college or they could go into some business field. In addition to House Bill 5, there were some expansions that allowed for kids to work on a 2-year degree while still in high school. A lot of kids are taking advantage of that, particularly in Port Arthur and industry, where they graduate from high school with a 2-year certificate in it may be HVAC, or it may be as an operator or something like that, which that was sort of unprecedented, and it's really a wonderful thing. You graduate from high school, and at the same time you're graduating from a 2-year college institution with a certificate right into the workforce.
Very good. Senator Creighton, here's one that's someone has a personal experience. I'm a Hurricane Harvey flood victim. What current or future projects are in place for flood mitigation?
Sure, great question. That we've had study after study on hurricane and flood impact, and I think all of us collectively together are tired of the studies, and we want to see some papers graded from all those studies, and then we want to see some projects take place. So, in the last legislative session, we really, our delegation worked very closely together to convince the rest of the legislature that what we had been doing as a precedent was no longer good enough. And what I mean by that is that historically, when there was a major flood under an emergency declaration and a disaster for Texas, the local elected officials, the city, the mayors, the county judges, the school districts, they worked directly with the feds. And under the president's emergency declaration, if emergency funding was approved, that funding would flow directly to those local entities. Well, many times the states will not engage in that process because, number one, it works well and has in the past, and that direct to local elected officials is appropriate. But with the largest storm in American history and the impact of Southeast Texas, we decided to step in, and Representative Phelan and I, along with Chairman Deschantel and Representative Middleton and many others, Senator Taylor, worked very closely to pass an unprecedented piece of legislation in Senate Bill 7, which is the largest flood recovery and mitigation bill in not only state history, it's the most comprehensive among all 50 states. And that allows for local governments to have the matching funds assistance from the state. A lot of local governments don't save matching fund money for a disaster, and if they do, it wipes them out. And so the feds passed a big funding bill, but local entities had to have skin in the game. They had to put matching funds together to draw down that big federal money. We helped with that, and we established 2 major flood funds for infrastructure. And that would primarily be funded with a couple of $2 billion out of our rainy day fund, right? We all hear about the rainy day fund, and we, as legislators, we protect it, and we don't use it for ongoing expenses in other categories, even sometimes when we're in a major deficit shortfall because of a major rainy day that it's intended for. And we found that rainy day, didn't we? So for Harvey, and for infrastructure all around the state, not just our region, those flood infrastructure funds, which were ratified at the polls by the voters, will now exist to accommodate major projects to take place. Jefferson County is relying on that for some drainage improvements. Any area of the state, especially in the greater Houston region on through Southeast Texas to the Sabine, can use it for dredging and for silting and for improvements to our riverbeds and our river basins that otherwise over the years has silted up, which can clog and snag and cause normal tributaries to not flow correctly. And a lot of that is in the works right now with the new rules being established from that bill, and the money is available. Now local governments are applying for projects that their engineers, through those studies I mentioned, have put together, and the work is beginning to take place. So more to come on that, and we'll produce on our websites what specific projects are happening, but some of them have been on the books a long time, and it's way past time to get them done.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question for Representative Deschantel. So we heard from Judge Brannick last Friday, and he mentioned the coastal wetlands, something that he grew up a part of. But could you give us an update maybe from the state level on the coastal barrier project?
Well, we've been working on the coastal barrier project for a number of years. We still don't have the funding. It's I've heard of $10 billion in funding, but primarily what it would be a seawall across the southern border of Texas at the water line, and with big I don't know what you call it, gates that would be able to open and close for shipping lanes to come in. We got to visit one in overseas that has been in place for a number of years. So we kind of know the engineering of how we can protect keep water out if there's a storm surge. But I don't see us having the funding. I mean, it took us 14, 15 years to get the deepening and widening funding. We started working on that many years ago and finally got the federal funding. So it's not realistic to believe that we're going to get the funding necessary. And then when the funds become available, there's going to be a great deal of competition between the Houston-Galveston area for those funds that we're going to be competing for the Orange and Jefferson County area to be included. We are included in the study. We are included in the berm and how it would be laid out. But any of us seeing that happen, I think the chances are slim in the near future. I suppose if there was some catastrophic hurricane that just, came inland, 20 miles inland along the coast, which could happen, then the attention and the money necessary would be brought forward. But unfortunately, the government is reactive. Farther away from the event it gets, the less attention the event gets. It's been a while since there's been a hurricane that caused a lot of damage and water coming in and a tidal surge. So that discussion on that project has also diminished. And that's just unfortunate way our attention gets on what's ringing the bell at the time.
Gotcha. Thank you. So thank you both for being here. Thanks for sticking with us for a couple questions. Representative Middleton, thank you very much for dialing in to talk to us. And Representative Phelan, thanks for taking the time to make a video so that your presence could be a part of this event as well. So enough moving parts for you guys out there today? I mean, I'm starting to breathe, so I'm good. But we're going to take all the information that we heard today, and we're going to use that to develop our legislative agenda. We're going to be knocking on your doors to make sure we've got it right, that we're in the right priority list that you are supporting as well. And ultimately, after the chamber puts their agenda together, then we'll get together with the other chambers in our area, and we'll develop our legislative agenda for Golden Triangle Days, which is going to take place February 2021. Thanks again to all of our sponsors. Thanks for being here with us today, and those that were unable to be here with us, but we appreciate your support. And everybody out there, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.